With ranking number 10 on the list, Dreamcatcher has to be up there. Sorry if anyone thinks this should be number 1. Dreamcatcher is phenomenal in many ways, especially with the CGI work, which I love. Number 10. This has to be on the bottom of the top 10 list. Dreamcatcher was one of them horror movies that is either a hit or a miss. You can't fault the ambition of director Lawrence Kasdan's audacious mixture of alien invasion thriller, creepy crawly horror, moffsy blockbusterism and sensitive drama. With a box office gross of $33,685,268 in the North American domestic market, Dreamcatcher earned only half of its estimated $68 million production budget, barely surpassing it worldwide with $75,715,436. Thus the film is considered a flop. Number 9. Maximum Overdrive. Whether you like it or, Maximum Overdrive has led to its top 9 of the list. The tale of a rogue comet sends machines into a week-long homicidal rampage. Q-Rabid electric knife, lethal Walkman, predatory lawnmower. And when a gas-starved convoy of sentient long haulers, including an 18-wheeler with a Green Goblin faceplate, lay siege to the Dixie Boy truck stop, short order cook Emilio Estevez and customers keep the big rigs at bay with hand grenades and a bazooka. King's gonzo directorial debut, and last behind-the-camera excursion to date, based on his short story Trucks, is one Looney Tunes junkyard mess, all set to the head-banging hits of his favorite band, AC/DC. Number 8. Ranking on number 8 is Stephen King's Running Man. King published his 1982 dystopian thriller under the pen name Richard Bachman. Paul Michael Glazer's movie adaptation is both the most 80s artifact of all time and a scarily relevant social satire. It's set in 2017, when America has become a totalitarian corporatocracy in which government and reality TV have become hopelessly intertwined. Sound familiar? A young, super-jacked Arnold Schwarzenegger is a captured rebel forced to participate in a life-or-death reality competition. Think The Hunger Games, but with synth music and chainsaws. But the most enduring legacy of The Running Man isn't Arnold's cheesy dialogue or the film's gleeful violence. It's the audience of cheering all-American consumers all too happy to sacrifice freedom for escapist entertainment. Number 7. Ranking the number 7 spot. One of King's scariest novels becomes one of the scarier movies made from one of his works. Director Mary Lambert's take on this creepy story, a variation on the horror classic The Monkey's Paw, follows a mourning father trying to use an ancient Indian burial ground to resurrect loved ones from the grave. It doesn't quite have the pathos of the book. King's original is not only terrifying, it's also impossibly sad. That coda is devastating, but the movie is still a ruthlessly effective thriller filled with jump scares and things that go bump in the night. Sometimes they do come back. Number 6. Ranking number 6 is The Shining. It's easily a ringer for both the top 2 haunted hotel movies and the top 3 man being filleted by a gent in a bear costume movies ever made. Why, you may ask, is The Shining not the number 1 choice on this list? Because if you're talking about adaptations of King's work, Stanley Kubrick's glorious, grandiose Ghost Story gets stocked points for often feeling like a semi-superficial skim over the source material, the equivalent of merely passing a bottle of vermouth over a dry martini rather than pouring any in. The author has long gone on record as hating Kubrick's take, as recently as 2014, He was still lamenting Jack Nicholson's crazy from the get-go performance and the film's hermetic vibe. The book is hot, and the movie is cold. Whether you think the film improves on the novel is a matter of opinion. We think it does, and anyone who wants fidelity can check out the 1997 miniseries, Topiary Animals and All. But seen through the lens of Stephen King movies, it's an interesting interpretation of the book's familial dysfunction and writer's block in extremis, and thus not a top-of-the-heap choice. It'll just have to settle for being one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. DF, number 5. Ranking number 5. Is Misery. Given that the writer takes defiant pride in penning books for fans and not critics, it's more than a little ironic that his one Oscar-winning movie is about a reader who loves an author way too much. Kathy Bates took home the Best Actress prize for her alternately funny and terrifying performance as a rural nurse who saves the life of her favorite novelist, James Caan, then forces him to write a novel that indulges her fangirl whims. King noted that the bestseller was both influenced by and written under the influence of some addictive substances. Misery is a book about cocaine, he claimed. Annie Wilkes is cocaine. She was my number one fan. Rob Reiner not only captures the original's comic and waking nightmare elements, he also gave the world a film that ended up predicting the increasingly toxic artist-audience relationship that's developed in the age of the internet. And that hobbling scene? Oh boy. Number 4. Ranking number 4 has to be Creepshow. It's technically not an out-and-out adaptation of one of King's books. The author wrote most of this EC Comics homage for the screen, only later turning the collection into an incredible graphic novel with legendary artist Bernie Wrightson. But we're including it nonetheless, as the movie could not be a pure distillation of the novelist's horror-centric sensibilities. The writer teamed up with George A. Romero for this Bloody Valentine to William Gaines' 1950s Gore Peddlers, the epitome of horror, he declares in Danse Macabre, and the quintet of delightfully ghoulish tales, two based on King's stories Weeds and the Crate, are a scream, Undead Patriarchs, Interstellar Kudzu, Sea-Soaked Zombie Lovers, an ancient Antarctic gorilla, even King himself as a hillbilly rube. Plus, thanks to makeup wizard Tom Savini, this candy-colored nightmare features some of the most indelible gross-out images of the 80s. Cockroach-infested corpse. Anyone? Number 3. Ranking number 3 has to be Christine. King's love of outsized characters and old-fashioned Americana make him a good match for Halloween. Escape from New York auteur John Carpenter, who oddly enough has only ever adapted one of the author's books. This wild tale of a haunted car's symbiotic relationship with a high school nerd. The first hour of Christine is the director at his best, with his camera mapping out all the ways small towns can be both comforting and confining. He also brings as much of King's colorfully profane dialogue and keen sense of character to the screen as he can, while always making sure the automotive horror runs neck and neck with scenes of teenage boys exploring their independence. Note to future filmmakers: this movie's opening is the only acceptable way to use George Thorogood's Bad to the Bone in a movie. Number 2. Ranking number 2 has to be The Dead Zone. David Cronenberg is the man who made body horror a thing. Stephen King's tales of terror derive much of their power from down-to-earth Americana. An odd couple, to be sure. But the Canadian auteur brings out the best in the story of a New England school teacher, professional weirdo Christopher Walken, Pitch Perfect, who awakens from a 5-year coma with the ability to see the future of anyone he touches. Co-starring Martin Sheen as a blustery, right-wing politician rising to power via blue-collar populism and ready to trigger World War III. Imagine that. It's cerebral but not chilly, complex but compelling, and as eerily prescient as its psychic protagonist. Number 1. Ranking number 1 has to be Carrie. My favorite movie of all times by Stephen King. William Catt, Sissy Spacek, Everett Collection. Brian De Palma's film version of King's first published novel is a masterpiece that stands on its own, both deeply unsettling and one of the more compassionate horror flicks you'll ever see. Could we even call it horror? Before it gets there, the movie goes through everything else: coming-of-age story, family drama, high school movie, social allegory, vigilante thriller. As the shy, repressed teenager tormented by her fellow students on one side and her deranged, Bible-quoting mother, Piper Laurie, on the other, Sissy Spacek is appropriately haunted and anxious. Her intense performance has the quality of an exposed nerve. We feel for this girl and understand the impossibility of escaping the emotional prison that she lives in. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 movie selections. That's all for tonight, Horror Top 10. Until next time, please subscribe and like this video. Leave a comment what horror theme I should do next.